Hi, my name is Joy Dawson, 31 years old, and this is the story of the night I finally realized how cruel conditional love can be. For years, I quietly paid my parents' mortgage and covered my sister's debts, believing I was fulfilling the sacred duty of the eldest daughter. But then they asked me to fund Rachel's entire dream wedding, insisting that since I was single and childless, what else would I need money for? When I refused, my mother texted me, "Transfer the money to your sister, or don't ever come home again." That night, I locked every account, booked a one-way flight out of the country, and walked away from the life I once thought was mine. Have you ever had to leave your own family just to find peace? And where are you listening from tonight? I'd really love to know. I'm Joy Dawson, and at 31, I learned one of life's harshest truths. Family love sometimes comes with unfair conditions. After years of quietly paying off mortgages, bailing my sister out of debt, and doing everything to set an example as the older sibling, I thought I'd done enough. Until the day they demanded I sponsor Rachel's entire wedding because, in their words, "You're single, no kids, so what else is your money for?" When I said no, my mother's message came cold and final. "Send the money, or never come home again." That night, I opened my laptop, froze every account they had access to, and booked a one-way ticket out of America. Have you ever been made to feel guilty by your own family just because you dared to choose freedom over obedience? I was born in Denver, Colorado, a city where winters always seem to last longer than people expect, and where roles in life are drawn early. Who will be the pride, and who will live in the shadow? In my family, that distinction was as clear as the snow that gathered on our porch every January morning. My sister, Rachel, was the perfect child, gentle, radiant, and effortlessly adored. She could win anyone's heart with just a smile. And me? I was the one who knew how to take care of herself, doing my own homework, fixing the messes, scrubbing paint off the floor when no one noticed. My parents, Linda and Frank, were the picture of middle-class respectability. Dad worked for an insurance company, Mom taught high school. Their lives were tidy, proper, guided by the unwavering belief that family helps family, a moral law carved in stone. The problem was, in our house, that help only flowed one way. I gave, Rachel received. I still remember being 12 the year Rachel broke our mother's crystal vase, the most precious wedding gift in our house. That entire afternoon, Mom cried quietly while Rachel trembled, hiding behind my back. When Dad asked who had done it, I stood still. Mom looked at me, waiting for what she considered the right answer. "It was me," I said. She sighed, said nothing, and only told me to pick up the shards carefully so I wouldn't cut myself. Rachel was forgiven. I was grounded for a week, no TV, no friends, no explanation. That was the day I learned my first lesson about family love. If my sister cried, her mistakes disappeared. If I stayed silent, peace was restored. The pattern never changed as we grew up. When Rachel failed her college entrance exams, my parents used the money they'd saved for my own graduation trip to pay for her to retake classes in another state. When she couldn't afford her dorm rent, they called me. I was 21, working part-time at a coffee shop, and said, "Just help her out a little. It's only temporary." I sent almost all my savings. In return, I received 2 words: "Thank you." Rachel never asked if I had enough left to eat, and my parents never considered that I might need someone to ask. My father was the kind of man who believed in the old order. The eldest daughter bears responsibility, the youngest deserves protection. My mother often said I was just like your father, logical, cold, difficult to love. That sentence followed me through my teenage years, confusing strength with the inability to be vulnerable. While Rachel was praised for her sensitive heart, I was constantly reminded to watch your tone, you sound too blunt. At the dinner table, her stories always filled the room: art scholarships, new boyfriends, vibrant plans for the future. And me? With my near-perfect GPA and 3 night shifts a week, all I ever got were lines like, "Don't work so hard, Joy. Leave some space for your sister to shine." How When Rachel held her first photography exhibition, I was the one setting up the lights, arranging each frame, adjusting the brightness so her portraits would look softer, warmer, more inviting. After the opening night, she stood beaming in our parents' embrace, while I stayed behind, wiping the lenses and coiling the power cords. I didn't feel angry. Back then, I still believed that love within a family meant service. Mom hugged me before leaving and whispered, "Family means sacrifice, Joy. You did well." Those words carved themselves so deeply into me that years later, even after moving away, I could still hear them echoing in my head every time I was about to say no. I chose to study event design at the University of Colorado Boulder, a major my parents called unstable and risky. Rachel, on the other hand, was fully encouraged to study fine arts, even though her tuition cost twice as much. I understood the message clearly. Her art was a dream worth pursuing. My effort was merely a job. I graduated early, working part-time while finishing school, and later moved to Seattle to build a life of my own. Starting with small community performances, I slowly built my own company, Dawson Lightworks, specializing in stage and event lighting design. I worked 14 hours a day, without holidays, without backup. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. My parents said they were proud, but the way they said it told me they didn't really understand what I did. Dad would ask, "How long do you plan to do this? When will you think about settling down?" And Rachel, recently engaged to Ethan, a real estate broker, just laughed and said, "She's already married to her laptop." I smiled it off, but something inside me tightened. It felt like standing under the perfect spotlight only to hear the applause go to someone else. Those years, I still sent Rachel birthday gifts, still went home for the holidays, still climbed the ladder to help Mom fix the Christmas lights on the roof. I thought that if I stayed quiet long enough, things would eventually balance out, but I was wrong. In my family, my silence was never peace, it was silent permission for them to keep taking. And I didn't know then that the principle I'd been raised to believe in, family helps family, would one day become the very noose tightening around my neck. By the time I turned 31, my life in Seattle was calmer than it had ever been. I rented a small apartment near Lake Union, bright enough that every morning, the sunlight reflected off the water right into my kitchen as I brewed coffee. After years of grinding myself down, my company, Dawson Lightworks, had finally reached a turning point. I had just completed a major lighting design contract for the Capitol Theater, one of the city's oldest venues. That project earned me recognition across the event industry, something I'd never even dared to dream of back when I was just a technician running cables backstage. That night, as the lights shifted from honey gold to soft blue, blanketing the stage in a final curtain of calm, I stood behind the wings feeling like the whole world was changing color with me. Soon after, offers started coming in from overseas companies. One in particular caught my attention, an email from Lumitech Events in Lisbon. They were assembling a team leader for their upcoming European Light Festival series and wanted me to join for at least a year. I must have read that email a dozen times. Lisbon, a coastal city bathed in sunlight, a place where no one knew me as Rachel's sister. The thought of living somewhere people would know me only as Joy, not as the provider, not as the responsible one, felt like breathing after years underwater. It took me nearly 2 weeks to decide, but in the end, I said yes. I told my mother over the phone. On the other end of the line, there was a brief silence before she said, "Lisbon. Where is that again? South America?" I smiled faintly. "Portugal, Mom. Europe." She murmured a vague "oh," her tone carrying a trace of unease. "That sounds so far. Are you going alone? Your father will be sad. And Rachel, well, she's just gotten engaged, the whole house is buzzing with excitement. What if you can't make it back for the wedding?" I told her softly that I'd come home, as long as they told me the date in advance. She exhaled with relief, and I could tell she wasn't truly happy for me, not because she didn't love me, but because my happiness didn't fit into the family's plans. A few weeks later, Rachel video called me. Her glowing face filled the screen, and behind her was a massive mood board crowded with wedding dress sketches, floral palettes, table settings, and one large photo of Napa Valley, California's wine country. "Look, Joy," she squealed. "I booked Glenview Estate. Oh my God, it's so dreamy." Her voice sparkled with excitement. I smiled, genuinely happy for her. I'd spent my whole childhood watching Rachel get everything she wanted, and by now, I no longer felt envy. I simply asked, "Are you sure you've got the budget covered? Places like that can be really expensive." Rachel rolled her eyes. "We've got it figured out. Ethan said we're just a tiny bit short, that's all. Mom and Dad are helping too. Don't worry, I'm not asking for money, I just wanted to show you." I chuckled lightly, not realizing those words would soon mark the calm before the storm. During my final weeks in Seattle, I spent my days packing up the office and finishing my work visa paperwork. The apartment slowly emptied, just a few cardboard boxes left, and my lighting equipment, which I planned to donate to a group of art students I once mentored. I felt lighter than ever, as if life were turning to a new chapter, one where I no longer had to be the person holding everything together. Each evening, I still got messages from Mom, mostly wedding updates. "Your sister just picked her wedding dress. Ethan wants to invite 150 more guests. You'll help with the lighting for the ceremony, right?" I always replied politely, keeping my tone cheerful, trying my best to sound like someone who still belonged. My father was different. He never said things directly, but every phone call carried some reminder of family responsibility. "How? Your mother's busy preparing the wedding, and Rachel's stressed about the expenses. You should check in on her, that's what an older sister does." I would just murmur a non-committal response, assuming he was speaking out of habit. I'd lived long enough to understand that in our family, the words older sister never meant equal. Emma. One Saturday morning, I received a package from Mom. Inside was a wedding invitation embossed in gold, tied with a pale pink ribbon, and a handwritten note. "Hope you can help Rachel with the stage lighting. The venue has very high standards, and you've always been the best at this." I read it and exhaled. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the familiar chill of something I thought I'd left behind, that unspoken expectation that always came disguised as affection. I called Mom to make it clear that I'd be attending as a guest, not working the wedding. She gave a soft, awkward laugh. "Oh, of course, sweetheart, I know. But if you could just help a little, it wouldn't hurt, right? After all, you're the one with the experience." Her voice was gentle, full of warmth, the exact tone that had made it nearly impossible for me to ever say no. So I changed the subject, telling her I'd be flying to Lisbon soon, that this was a big opportunity for me. She said only one thing. "You can stay as long as you like, as long as you don't forget where you belong." Her words landed heavy in my chest, as if chasing my dream was somehow a form of betrayal. That night, I stayed up sorting through contracts, sending thank you emails to clients, and finishing my packing. Outside, a light Seattle drizzle tapped against the window, that familiar rhythm of the city, steady but cold. I sat in front of my laptop, staring at two open tabs. One was the email from Lisbon titled, "Welcome to Lumatech." The other, Rachel's wedding invitation. Two worlds on the same screen, one opening wide, the other waiting to pull me back. I didn't know then that in just a few days, those two worlds would collide and everything I believed about family would collapse completely. That afternoon, Seattle wore its familiar gray mood. It had just rained, and streaks of water still clung to the window pane, reflecting a faint, washed-out sunset. I was reviewing the list of lighting equipment to ship to Lisbon when my phone rang. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a second. Calls from her rarely came just to say hello. I answered anyway. Her voice was bright, full of energy, but there was something strained underneath. "Hey, Joy, can we talk for a minute?" I leaned back in my chair, assuming it was another wedding update. "Sure, Rachel. What's up?" There was a short silence, and then she went straight to the point, as if she'd practiced the line in her head. "Joy, I'm short about $35,000 for the venue deposit. Mom and Dad said you could help. For a split second, I almost laughed at the bluntness, but I kept my voice calm. Rachel, I'm moving to Lisbon soon. I need to hold on to my savings to cover the relocation costs. You know how expensive international moves are. Silence again. Then her tone shifted slower, but sharper. Joy, you're single, no kids, and you're doing really well. It's not like you need that much money just sitting there. Ethan and I are starting our life together, this is our chance. I felt the arrogance tucked beneath her words. It wasn't really a request, it was an order, wrapped in sweetness. I took a deep breath, steadying my tone. Rachel, I'm genuinely happy for you, I mean that. But $35,000 isn't a small favor. I can't just hand it over. You and Ethan could always pick a more affordable venue, right? Her voice wavered, shifting from pleading to frustrated. You don't understand, Joy. I've dreamed of this wedding since I was a kid. Glenview Estate is perfect, Mom agrees. Everyone said you'd be able to handle this part. I'll pay you back once Ethan gets his raise. I closed my eyes, listening to the soft drizzle taper off outside the window. Rachel, I said quietly, this isn't about repayment. I just don't want to get pulled into anyone else's finances anymore. You understand that, don't you? A long silence. Then Rachel let out a short, bitter laugh. Of course I understand. You've always been good with calculations, haven't you? Always putting work before family. Always acting like money is everything. I bit my lip. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that line. They always called me cold whenever I drew a boundary. But this time, it stung deeper. Rachel, I said softly, I'm not choosing money over you. I'm choosing my own life. I've worked hard for a little bit of stability, and I won't feel guilty for not sacrificing more. She exhaled sharply. I could hear her trying not to cry and then spoke one last time, her voice trembling with resentment. Mom's going to be so disappointed when she finds out. Dad too. I just thought that, at least on my wedding day, you wouldn't let everyone down. And then, she hung up. I stared at the dark screen, feeling a mix of anger and emptiness. I knew the conversation wasn't over. With Rachel, any disagreement that didn't end her way always became a family issue. I stood up, made myself another cup of coffee, and tried to focus on work invoices, shipping lists, design notes. But my mind kept circling back to the numbers. $35,000, a lavish dream someone else expected me to fund. That evening, an email from Mom appeared in my inbox. Just one sentence. Rachel said you're hesitating about helping her. Your father and I trust you'll do the right thing. No greeting. No question mark. Just a gentle-sounding statement that carried the full weight of expectation. I read it again and again before closing my laptop, turning off every light in the apartment, and sitting in the dark, letting the silence finally speak louder than any of them ever had. I didn't sleep that night. All I could see in my mind was the image of Rachel's dream wedding at Glenview Estate, the golden string lights draped across the vineyards, the expensive white gown, the silk-covered tables. Everything was picture-perfect, almost artificial, as if she were building a stage to prove to the world that our family was successful. And me, the only one who actually knew how to turn light into something real, was being asked to pay for that illusion. The next morning, on my way to the office, my phone rang. I didn't need to look to know it was about last night. Joy, my mother began, her voice soft but tense. I know you're busy, but Rachel really needs you right now. The whole family is counting on you. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone steady. Mom, I already told Rachel, I can't. On the other end, she sighed. Do you realize how much you're hurting your sister? She cried all night. Ethan had to calm her down. I said nothing. Over the years, I'd learned that silence was sometimes the only way to avoid being dragged into endless arguments. You've really changed, she said after a pause, her voice colder now. Do you think money is what will make you happy? You're about to move away, don't you want to leave something good behind? The words pierced me like a needle. She had always known exactly how to make me feel guilty for doing what was right for myself. Mom, I said quietly, what I want to leave behind isn't money, it's peace. There was a long silence. Then she said just one sentence, calm, final, and heavy as stone. I'm disappointed in you, Joy. When the call ended, I sat in the car for a few more minutes, staring out the windshield. The rain had started again. At the red light ahead, cars slowed to a stop, and their brake lights reflected on the wet asphalt streaks of red that looked almost like blood. I wondered if, in their eyes, I really was the ungrateful one my mother said I'd become. But somewhere in the storm of that thought, a strange clarity surfaced. If protecting my own life meant disappointing them, maybe, for the first time, I was finally doing something right. 3 days after the call with my mother, I received a text from my father. Come home for dinner this weekend. The family needs to talk. No question mark. No option. Just a statement, an order wrapped in politeness. I knew immediately it was about Rachel. I had tried to avoid it, but in my family, avoidance only delayed the inevitable. They wouldn't stop until they got the answer they wanted. That Saturday, I drove nearly 2 hours from Seattle to the small town near Tacoma where my parents lived. The sky was gray, mist curling low over the pine trees that lined the road. I used to love that drive, the scent of resin, the calm hush of the countryside, but that day, it felt suffocating. When I walked into the house, everything was already set. The dining table was laid out perfectly, almost too perfectly, the kind of perfection that hides tension. Rachel and Ethan were already there, sitting side by side, chatting cheerfully with my father as if this were some joyful family reunion. I took a seat, forcing myself to stay calm. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal, small talk about the weather, my upcoming move to Lisbon, the new job. Mom feigned interest, smiling as she asked, "Lisbon must be beautiful, isn't it?" I returned the smile. "I haven't been yet, but from what I've heard, it's incredible." She nodded, then exchanged a glance with Rachel before fixing her eyes on me. "Well, it's nice that you're leaving before the wedding, but at least you can help your sister before you go." I felt the air tighten around the table. Rachel straightened up immediately, her face brightening like a signal had been given. "Joy," she began. "We're having a little financial hiccup. Ethan just got promoted, but his bonus hasn't come through yet, and the venue needs payment before the end of the month." Ethan chimed in calm, confident, maybe a little too sure of himself. "Joy, I know your company's well known in Seattle. If you could sponsor the lighting for the wedding, we'd list Dawson Lightworks as an official partner. I have a lot of clients in real estate, they'd see your name in the program. Great exposure for you." I sat there, staring at the two of them, realizing this wasn't dinner. It was a presentation, and I was the funding opportunity. I bit my lip, trying to suppress a bitter laugh. "Ethan," I said evenly, "I don't sponsor weddings. My lighting work is a service, not a gift. And even if it were promotion, I'm not interested in paying for exposure with my own savings." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Rachel rolled her eyes, her tone rising. "You always think everyone's trying to take advantage of you. I'm just asking for a little help. You've worked your whole life, you don't have kids, no responsibilities, what are you even saving for?" Dad set his chopsticks down, his voice low but firm. "Joy, you should understand that helping your sister is the right thing to do. We're not asking for much. You're doing well, you're capable, it's only fair to share a bit." I turned toward him, forcing my tone to stay calm. "Dad, I've worked hard for 8 years to build those savings. That's not extra money lying around, it's my effort, my future. Rachel can choose a smaller wedding, or wait until she can afford it. I can't carry that for her." "Nah." Mom jumped in, her voice trembling but laced with emotional pressure. "Our family isn't short on love, Joy, just on understanding. Help her this one time, and after that she'll manage on her own." I looked at her. She always did this, used gentleness like a weapon, her pleading eyes making you feel like refusing meant you lacked a heart. I took a sip of water, the bitterness lingering on my tongue. "Mom," I said quietly, "I've already told you, I can't." The air in the room froze. Rachel slammed her wine glass down on the table. "Fine, I get it. You'd rather lose your family than lose your money. Ethan raised his eyebrows slightly, as if to agree. I set my napkin aside and spoke softly, but with finality. No, Rachel, I'm just afraid of losing myself. Mom exhaled, reaching across the table to grab my wrist, her voice trembling with desperation. Joy, please don't do this. I don't want my daughters to grow apart. I've already invited everyone, the church is booked, the band's paid, all I ever wanted was peace between you two. I gently pulled my hand back. I want that too, Mom. But peace shouldn't come with a price tag. Dad's voice came next, low and heavy like a verdict. If that's your decision, don't expect your mother to be at peace. You can be a stranger to us if you want, but when the day comes that you need something, don't come back looking for help. Ah. His words landed on the table like a sentence being passed. I stood up, my heart pounding hard against my ribs. I've never asked for anything, Dad. All I ever wanted was respect. Rachel spoke softly, almost a whisper, but loud enough to slice through the silence. You're so selfish. I turned to look at her, the little girl I once protected, now staring at me like I was a traitor. Maybe, I said quietly. But at least I'm not pretending that love is a bill to be paid. End of the I grabbed my coat and walked toward the door. Mom called after me, her voice trembling with disbelief. Joy, where are you going? Sit down. We're not done talking. I turned back for one last look. The living room was exactly as I remembered, the walls lined with framed photos, every one of them centered around Rachel. Her graduation. Her birthdays. The Hawaii vacation. And me appearing only at the edges, half lit, half there. I'm full, Mom, I said softly. Full from dinner, and from conversations like this. No one followed me out. The air outside was freezing, the smell of damp wood mixing with the faint smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house, its windows glowing warm and golden. A comforting light, but not mine. Never mine. When I finally started the engine, I didn't feel angry. Just empty, as if something had fallen out of me that would never come back. On the drive back to Seattle, the streetlights flickered through the trees, flashing across my windshield like the heartbeat of someone learning not to be afraid anymore. By the time I reached home, night had swallowed the city. The roads glistened from the rain, streetlights reflecting across the wet asphalt like cracks in a broken mirror. The cold from dinner still clung to me, not from the weather, but from the look in my parents' eyes. I hung up my coat and sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where I used to work late, sketching lighting plans for clients. My laptop was still open, the half-finished stage layout glowing faintly on the screen. But I couldn't focus. I picked up my phone. A new notification blinked. Mom. Transfer the money or don't come back. 7 words. No exclamation mark. No explanation. Not even a single please. Just a command, bare, cold, metallic. I stared at it, reading it over and over, as if my brain refused to believe that message came from my mother. Maybe I had expected something else, even a flicker of hesitation, a trace of tenderness between the lines, but there was nothing. Only demand. And threat. I set the phone down and stared at the wooden table. The warm light cast my trembling hands in gold, their shadows shaking on the surface. And then, like a rush of cold water, memories flooded in. When I was 25 and Dad lost his job temporarily, I sent them my entire first savings to help cover the mortgage. When Rachel got into a car accident, I paid the hospital bill because their insurance didn't cover enough. When Mom needed the roof repaired, I took out a business credit loan to send her the money. Every time, it was wrapped in the same 2 words, family. Not once did they say, that's enough. Not once did I hear thank you. Right. And at that moment, I understood this was never about money. This was about control. It was how they kept me tied to them, turning love into a debt and filial duty into chains. I wasn't a daughter. I was an emergency fund, a safety net for every storm. And if I ever stopped giving, they'd call it betrayal. Mom knew exactly where to strike guilt. She didn't need to raise her voice. All it took was 7 words. I stood abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had started again. Across the street, apartment windows glowed softly, each one a tiny story unfolding in private. I wondered how many others were sitting alone tonight, staring at messages like mine, words that managed to wound and manipulate in the same breath. My phone buzzed again. I looked but didn't open it. A second message flashed across the screen. From Mom. Rachel's crying. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? I closed my eyes, letting the wave of emotion rise and fall without fighting it. For the first time in my life, I felt no urge to defend myself, no need to explain that I wasn't heartless, that I didn't owe anyone anything just because I had chosen to live differently. For the first time, I was simply done. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. The numbers appeared on the screen, the sum of thousands of hours of work, countless sleepless nights, hundreds of contracts, and more than a few last-minute client cancellations. I opened my financial spreadsheet next, scanning through every investment, every expense, every drop of effort that had built the life I now had. And strangely, I felt calm. Mom had said not to come back if I didn't transfer the money, so I decided not to. I would go somewhere they couldn't reach me. I pulled the chair closer and opened a new tab to search for flights to Lisbon. Originally, I had planned to leave in 2 weeks, after finishing up work and saying my goodbyes. But now, I wanted to be gone as soon as possible. There was a flight that Friday just 5 days away. I clicked Book Now, filled in my details, entered the payment code. When the confirmation appeared, booking confirmed, one-way ticket, I exhaled deeply, feeling as if an invisible cord had finally been cut from around my throat. My phone kept buzzing, wave after wave of notifications. I switched it to silent. The apartment grew quiet again, filled only with the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. I went to the cabinet and took out a small bottle of wine I'd been saving for my farewell party with colleagues. I poured a glass. The first sip burned my throat, but the bitterness soon softened into warmth that spread slowly down my chest. I looked around my apartment, modest, but mine. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every light fixture had been chosen by me. It was the first space I'd ever created that belonged entirely to myself, a place where no one could tell me what to do. Before going to bed, I opened Mom's message one last time, then deleted it. I deleted the entire thread with Rachel too, the accusations, the guilt trips, the tears used as weapons. When the screen went dark, I saw my reflection staring back, not proud, not afraid, just tired. Tired in the way someone looks when they finally understand where their limits lie. That night, I barely slept. I packed slowly, checking documents, folding clothes, zipping each suitcase with deliberate precision. Each pull of the zipper sounded like a clean cut, a quiet, decisive break from the past. When dawn came, I brewed coffee and sat by the window, watching raindrops slide off the eaves. I thought about Lisbon, the European sunlight I'd never seen, the freedom I'd always thought was too expensive to afford. I knew what I'd done would make them furious. Maybe they'd never forgive me. But I also knew this. I couldn't keep living my life terrified of disappointing people who were never proud of me to begin with. Before leaving my desk, I opened my laptop and wrote a short email to my family. I can't transfer the money. This isn't because I lack love, it's because I need to keep the last bit of respect I have for myself. I hope Rachel's wedding goes smoothly, but I won't be contributing financially in any way. I'm leaving for Lisbon soon to start my new job. Wishing everyone peace. I signed my name, hit send, and closed the laptop. The room fell into silence. Outside, dawn was breaking behind the gray clouds. A faint light slipped through the curtains, weak, but real. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the light anymore. The next morning, I woke up with my head heavy as lead. I hadn't really slept, just lay still in the dark, listening to the rain tapping against the window and the phone buzzing every so often before going quiet again. The morning light that crept in through the blinds was pale and cold. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at my desk, intending to check work emails, when a new notification caught my eye, a recent payment alert from Amex. A card I almost never used anymore. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but an uneasy feeling made me click. The transaction list appeared, and my eyes froze on the first line. Vera Bridal Boutique, $4,28. Elysium Spa and Wellness, $920. Glenview Catering, $2,300, deposit. I sat still for several seconds, the coffee cooling in my hand. It couldn't be. I had never made any of those purchases. I opened the Authorized Users tab. And there it was, a name I had completely forgotten about, Rachel Dawson. My stomach tightened. Years ago, when she'd just graduated, I had added her as an authorized user on my credit card just to help her build a credit history. It's only temporary, I'd told her. Don't make any charges without telling me. Then life had swept me away: projects, contracts, sleepless nights. And Rachel, of course, had never mentioned it again. I scrolled down to the transaction dates. Every charge had been made in the past 2 weeks, right around the time she'd called asking for help with the wedding deposit. My breathing quickened. So while she was saying she was short on money, she had already been quietly spending mine. I didn't know what shocked me more: that Rachel had done it, or that I had still been naive enough to believe silence could ever set me free from their cycle of taking. I called Amex immediately. A woman's voice answered, calm and professional. How can we assist you today, Miss Dawson? I steadied my breathing. I need to remove an authorized user from my account immediately, and I'd like to report several recent transactions as unauthorized. There was a brief pause on the other end, then her tone shifted, more formal now. Of course. We'll proceed with the verification. Could you please confirm the name of the authorized user? Rachel Dawson, I said. The name came out heavy, like I'd just confessed to something shameful about myself. After 10 minutes of verification and back and forth, the representative confirmed that Rachel's access had been revoked, her card permanently disabled. The disputed charges would be temporarily refunded while they investigated. I thanked her and hung up, but the knot in my chest didn't loosen. I opened my bank account next. A surge of unease pushed me to check every detail. And just as I feared, under the beneficiary section, the people who would inherit the funds if anything happened to me, Rachel's name appeared second, right under my mother's. I had added them years ago, when I was 26 and just starting to save. Back then, it felt natural. They're my family, I'd told myself. If something ever happens to me, they should be protected. That. Now, reading those lines felt like staring at the fine print of my own captivity chains I had clasped onto myself without ever realizing it. I opened the change beneficiary form, re-entered my information, and removed both names. Within minutes, a confirmation email arrived. Your account ownership and beneficiaries have been updated successfully. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt like I had actually severed something, not through anger, but through clarity. Then I went through everything else. PayPal, Venmo, investment accounts, retirement fund, even Netflix, the one Rachel had used for years, under my email. I changed every password, activated two-factor authentication, added verification codes to every single account. Each click, each confirmation text that pinged on my phone made me feel lighter. For so long, I'd been afraid of doing this, afraid it would make me paranoid, ungrateful, or too harsh. But now I understood the truth. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. That afternoon, while I was writing my checklist of things to do before leaving for Lisbon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mom. Then Rachel. Then Dad. I didn't answer any of them. With each ring, instead of anxiety, a strange calm settled over me, not apathy, but the realization that none of those calls were truly meant for me. They didn't want to talk. They wanted to reclaim control. I reopened my flight details, departure in 7 days. One way. Seattle to Lisbon, with a layover in Frankfurt. I read every line carefully, then printed the ticket and placed it on my desk, right beside my passport. That small piece of paper felt like everything: freedom, a new beginning, and a quiet, unfamiliar kind of fear I hadn't yet faced. Later that evening, I video called my colleague in Lisbon to confirm project details. Her name was Elena, the international project lead. Her face lit up when I told her I'd be arriving earlier than planned. "Welcome home in advance," she said playfully. Home. That word made me pause. Home, I wasn't sure which place deserved that name anymore. The small apartment I had built with my own hands, or the faraway city across the ocean where no one knew me but where, for once, I could simply exist as myself. After the call, I turned off every light except the small one in the kitchen. I brewed a cup of tea and sat beside the open suitcase. Clothes, documents, laptop, a few photos. My hand lingered over one picture me and Rachel as kids, on an old bicycle. I was pedaling, she was behind me, laughing, her hands raised toward the sky. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I set it aside. I didn't want to carry the past across an ocean. Close to midnight, I refreshed my inbox. A new email from Amex appeared. All disputed charges have been reversed pending investigation. A faint smile crossed my face. Rachel was probably panicking now, her card locked, the charges reversed. I knew there would be more calls, maybe an entire storm of blame and accusation. But this time, I was ready. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I didn't need to respond. I didn't have to fix the peace that everyone else kept breaking. All I had to do was stay silent. Outside, the rain had stopped. A soft breeze slipped through the crack in the window, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and the cold breath of the sea. I took a slow sip of tea and opened my to-do before departure list, adding one last line. Finish cutting all remaining financial ties. And beneath it, in pencil, not as a task, but as a reminder to myself, I wrote, "Freedom doesn't begin with a plane ticket. It begins the moment you stop fearing the loss of someone just because you dared to keep yourself." That night, Seattle stayed awake. And I chose silence in the middle of the storm my own family had unleashed. The phone began buzzing around 9. First Mom. Then Rachel. Then Dad. After that, a flood of familiar and unfamiliar numbers, aunts, uncles, cousins, even Rachel's friends I'd never spoken to. By 11, my screen was flashing nonstop, as if someone were pounding on a locked door, desperate to break through. 100 missed calls. A round, heavy number that almost made me laugh. I opened the message thread and scrolled down. The first text was from Mom. "Rachel's devastated. Don't do this anymore, just send her the money, everything will be fine." The next one, completely different tone. "You're so ungrateful. We raised you for this?" Then from Rachel. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. The whole family thinks you're selfish." Followed by another. "I can't believe you stooped so low as to report my card. Everyone's saying you've destroyed this family." I read every message. Didn't cry. Didn't shake. Didn't even feel angry. Just a strange kind of stillness, the kind that follows when a rope that's been pulled too tight for too long finally snaps. And the sound after it isn't an explosion. It's silence. I turned the phone face down on the table and took a deep breath. In my head, I heard my mother's old words, the ones she used to tell me when I was little. Family is everything. I used to believe that. But now I understood everything only means something when it isn't built on one person's endless sacrifice. Outside, the rain started again, tapping lightly against the window pane. I opened my laptop and pulled up the lighting design plans for the Lisbon project. Lines, grids, beams of color stretched across the screen, every thread of light guiding me out of the chaos. For the first time, my work didn't feel like escape. It felt like breathing. A while later, my phone lit up again. This time, it was a voice message from my father. His voice was hoarse, laced with restrained anger. "Joy, I don't know what's gotten into you. You're breaking your mother's heart. If you've chosen to walk away from this family, then don't expect to come back. No one will be waiting for you." I listened to the message in silence. I remembered that voice, the same one that once guided me through how to change a light bulb when I was little. I remembered his old words. Never let anyone make you feel small just because you can stand on your own. How ironic, I thought. Because now, he was the one doing exactly that. I didn't want a conversation. I wanted closure. I opened my email, created a new message, and sent it to the entire family contact group Mom had made years ago. I typed without stopping, every word coming out clean, deliberate, as if I'd been rehearsing them in my head for years. I will say this one last time. I am not funding Rachel's wedding. No one, including my parents, has access to my finances in any form. I will not continue this argument or be dragged into further discussions. I wish everyone well with their plans. I will be leaving for Lisbon in the coming days and will not be involved in any family matters from this point on. I read it twice. Then, clicked send. When the screen displayed message sent, I felt as though I'd stepped through an invisible door light, certain, with no need to turn back. The phone kept vibrating, but now the sound was distant, like rain tapping on some faraway window. Every word, every threat, every plea for pity had turned into an echo from a house I no longer lived in. I turned off the ringer, placed the phone in a drawer, and faced the glow of my computer screen. The light from it reflected softly across my face, a light I had created myself, not one handed to me. The clock read nearly 2 a.m. I kept working, adjusting the main stage lighting sequence for the Lisbon event. Golden, white, and amber beams moved across the digital layout like a slow, steady breath. And as I watched the patterns unfold, I realized something simple, something I had always known but never said out loud. Light, the very thing I'd spent my life shaping, had never betrayed me. It could be blinding. It could be cold. It could expose every crack and flaw. But at least, it was always honest. I saved the file, closed my laptop, and leaned back in the chair. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the wind drifting down the hallway outside my door. I thought about Lisbon, the apartment I'd rented overlooking the Tagus River, the mornings I'd wake up without the dread of a ringing phone. I thought about myself, no longer Rachel's sister, no longer the Dawson daughter, but simply Joy, a 31-year-old woman, learning what it actually means to live. I stood and stepped out onto the balcony. The city slept beneath a thin veil of fog, the distant lights of late-night offices still glowing, faintly tiny pockets of people wrestling with their own kinds of freedom. I smiled, small but real. The next morning, I woke to perfect silence. No ringing. No messages. No echo from the chaos of yesterday. I brewed my coffee and opened the window. The early Seattle air rushed in cool, damp, carrying that scent of fresh beginnings. I sat down at my desk, ready to open my work schedule, when the phone rang. A familiar number, but not one that had been haunting me all night. Aunt Marlene. I hesitated for a second, then answered. Her voice was low, warm, and slow, like a cup of tea that had been steeped just right. "Joy, it's me," she said. "I know you probably don't want to talk to anyone in the family right now, but please, just hear me out." I didn't say anything. Something in her tone told me this wasn't another attempt to guilt me. "I know what happened last night," she continued softly. "And I want you to hear this from me. You're not selfish, Joy. You just had the courage to do what everyone else is too afraid to do." I stayed silent, letting her words settle like rain soaking slowly into dry earth. She went on, her voice gentle, almost like she was telling me an old story. "Your mother was just like you once. When she was young, your grandparents forced her to hand over her entire first paycheck to pay for Uncle Daniel's college tuition. They said it was for family. But it wasn't a request, it was an obligation. She wanted to keep a little for herself, just a small amount, and they called her selfish. So she gave in the way the women in this family always have." I tightened my grip around the coffee mug. I had never heard that story before. In my eyes, my mother had always been the strong one, the decision-maker, the enforcer, the voice that couldn't be challenged. But as Aunt Marlene spoke, something inside me shifted. I could suddenly see where it all came from. "Do you know why your mother treats you the way she does?" my aunt asked gently. I hesitated. "Because she believes it's love?" Marlene let out a soft, sad laugh. "No, sweetheart. Because she believes it's duty. She was never allowed to say no, so she doesn't know how to let you say it either. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight in my chest settle into something quieter, deeper. Her words fit like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. All these years, I had thought I was the problem, too cold, too practical, too different. I never once considered that my mother might also be a casualty of an old cycle, one where love was confused with sacrifice, and where women were taught that their worth depended on saving everyone but themselves. I tried talking to your mother this morning, Marlene said softly. She's in pain, but not because of what you did wrong. She just doesn't know how to handle the fact that you broke a chain she never had the courage to break. Oh. Her voice faltered for a moment before she added, "You did the right thing, Joy. I'm proud of you. Don't let them convince you otherwise." My throat tightened. No one had ever said that to me before. No one in this family had ever called my act of self-protection right. "Thank you, Aunt Marlene," I whispered. "But it still feels heavy. They hate me. They think I've betrayed them." She sighed, her tone firm but kind. Betrayal isn't when you refuse to destroy your life for someone else. Betrayal is when they make you live their lives for them and call it love. I closed my eyes. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks, not from pain, but from release. "Do you ever get tired?" I asked quietly, "of trying to make everyone else happy?" She chuckled, the kind of laugh that carries years of knowing. "All my life," she said. "But eventually I realized they'll never be happy, no matter how much you give. Because the truth is, they don't want you happy, Joy. They just want you obedient." The room fell into a strange, almost sacred quiet. I looked out the window. The first strands of late morning sunlight stretched across the street, glinting off the glass buildings. That light felt like confirmation. I had chosen right. "Aunt Marlene," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months, "I think I finally understand. All those family duties they've talked about my whole life, they weren't really love. They were just ways to keep the cycle of sacrifice alive." She replied softly, "Exactly. And you, Joy, are the first to break it. No matter how angry they are now, one day, they'll have to learn to respect you for it." We stayed silent for a long while, listening only to the sound of each other's breathing through the phone. Then she added gently, "Your mother will need time. But don't let guilt pull you back. You don't owe anyone anything. You're just living the way everyone should have been allowed to." When the call ended, I set the phone on the table and sat still for a long time. Something inside me had quietly rearranged itself, like dust finally settling after years of storm. I thought of my mother, a woman once forced to carry responsibilities that were never hers to begin with. I thought of my grandmother, probably trapped in the same mold before her. A quiet current of sacrifice, flowing through generations, disguised in sweet words. Family helps family. I opened my laptop and began typing a note to myself, a final line to close the chapter that had defined my life. "I am not cruel, I just chose to stop. To stop being the person others needed, so I could finally become the person I needed." Outside, the sun climbed higher, its light spilling through the curtains, brushing softly across my shoulder. In that moment, I felt no guilt, only peace. A stillness so deep it almost hummed. And a quiet, profound gratitude. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for certain. The cycle of sacrifice had ended with me. That afternoon, I rolled my suitcase out of my small apartment in downtown Seattle, the place that had once been my battlefield of sleepless nights and torn loyalties between family and self. A light rain had started, the kind Seattle was famous for, not loud, just steady, lingering, as if the sky itself didn't want me to leave. I stood at the doorway for a moment, taking in the emptiness. The room was bare now, only the old work desk, a few sketchbooks of lighting designs, and a faded chair left behind. All small things. But as I closed the door, I knew what I was truly leaving wasn't furniture. It was an entire life where every choice I made had been defined by two words: duty and debt. And for the first time, I was walking away free. The flight from Seattle to Lisbon lasted more than 10 hours, but I barely slept. Through the window, I watched the sky shift from night to dawn, from gray to pale blue, then to a soft golden honey. Something inside me changed with it lighter, clearer, as if every new layer of air were washing away what no longer belonged. When the plane landed in Lisbon, I turned on my phone not to check messages, but to silence every notification once and for all. I wanted to start again, from zero. The city greeted me with sunlight and sea wind. Lisbon smelled of salt and ripe oranges, its cobblestone streets winding up and down the hills, lined with pastel yellow and rose-colored houses stacked like seashells. I wheeled my suitcase across a small square, listening to the sound of its wheels rolling over stone, and it felt like walking into a new chapter of my life. My new workplace, Lumitech Events, was in a sleek building near the Baixa district, where the sloping streets led straight down to the Tagus River. I arrived that first afternoon carrying my folder and a quiet pulse of nervous excitement. Elena, the project director who had interviewed me over video, greeted me with a warm smile and a tiny espresso. "Welcome home, Joy," she said. And for the first time in my life, the word home didn't feel forced. The days that followed swept me up quickly. At Lumitech, everything revolved around light literally. We designed light festivals, technology conferences, and performances where light itself told the story. I led the creative team, sketching lighting layouts for an international festival scheduled in Porto. Each morning, I walked into an office flooded with sunlight, the air alive with a mix of Portuguese and English chatter. No one asked me why I was here. No one told me to call home. No one made me feel guilty for choosing my own life. In the evenings, I often wandered through the narrow streets of Alfama, where people drank wine on terraces and sang fado mournful songs that somehow sounded free. I didn't understand every word, but I understood the emotion. Sadness not as a chain, but as release. Some nights, I sat on the stone steps overlooking the Tagus, watching the moonlight ripple on the water. And I realized after all these years I had never truly known peace. Here, I didn't have to defend myself. I didn't have to explain. Here, I only had to breathe. A week later, I received my first email from the US project team. It was short. "We miss your steady energy." I smiled and replied with a photo I'd just taken on a Lisbon street, light reflecting off a brick wall, a tiny cup of espresso in the corner, and a simple caption: "Learning to exist without apology." While I was learning the language of freedom, somewhere across the ocean, Rachel's wedding was quietly collapsing. I didn't know it yet. But a few days later, while sitting in a small cafe on Rua de Prata, adjusting the lighting layout for the upcoming Reignite festival, my phone buzzed. An email popped up with the subject line: "You should probably know what's going on." The sender's name made me pause. Tessa Martin. It took me a moment to remember. Tessa had been Rachel's best friend back in college, someone I'd only met briefly at family gatherings. I opened the email, a flicker of unease rippling through me. "Hi Joy. We've never really talked, but I think you deserve to know. Rachel's been saying some untrue things about you, that you abandoned the family and embarrassed them. But the truth is, she's in serious trouble. She's borrowed money from a lot of people, friends, coworkers, even some of Ethan's contacts, promising she'd pay them back right after receiving the funds you supposedly agreed to send. No one has seen a cent. Now they're all demanding repayment, and she's avoiding everyone. I'm telling you this not to stir things up, but because I think you need to know you did the right thing by stepping away. Tessa." I froze. The cafe around me faded into background noise, the soft clatter of cups, the low hum of conversation, the faint hiss of the espresso machine. I read the message again, slower this time, feeling each word sink in. So it hadn't been just about a missing deposit. Behind it all was a web of borrowed money, spun from promises and appearances. Rachel, the sister who smiled so perfectly for every photo, was drowning in debts of her own making, desperately trying to protect an illusion. A perfect wedding, a perfect image, a perfect life others would envy. And as I stared at the email, I realized something quietly devastating. She had built that illusion on the very thing I had spent my life dismantling. The belief that love and approval could be bought. Tessa ended her email with one final line. Ethan's been found to have over $40,000 in credit card debt. The dream wedding in Napa has been canceled. They're moving it to a small restaurant in Sacramento. Everyone's talking. I thought you'd want to know, not to feel happy, but to feel at peace. I turned off the screen and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the Lisbon sun slanted through the cafe window, laying a golden stripe across the table. I stared at my cold cup of coffee and thought maybe this was exactly how everything was meant to unfold. If I had said yes back then, I would have been dragged straight into this chaos, another player in their endless theater of pretense, where everyone performed fine to protect their pride. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt lighter, the kind of lightness that comes when a wound has already healed and all that's left is a faint scar. That evening, another email arrived, this time from Rachel. The subject line screamed in all caps, "I hope you're happy now, Ivory." I hesitated for a few seconds, then opened it. "You embarrassed me in front of the whole family. Everyone keeps asking why you abandoned me. Mom won't say anything, but I know she's been crying. Ethan and I had to move the wedding to Sacramento, just a small restaurant no one would dream of. People look at me with pity now. You've won, haven't you? Are you happy watching me lose everything?" Not a single word of apology. Not even a hint of awareness of what she'd done. Just the same tone I'd heard my whole life, blame disguised as sorrow, manipulation dressed up as emotion, every sentence a rope meant to pull me back in. I scrolled to the end. One last line waited there. "One day, you'll regret choosing your career over your family." I exhaled slowly, sitting there for a long time. I wasn't angry. Just tired, but in a peaceful way, the kind of tired that comes when you finally stop fighting for people who never wanted to understand you. I didn't reply. Instead, I created a new folder in my inbox, titled "For Closure," and saved Rachel's email there. I knew my silence would probably enrage her even more, would be called cold, heartless, abandoning. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. Because I'd finally learned that sometimes silence isn't escape. It's self-protection. It's peace. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Elena was reviewing the 3D lighting model for the Porto Festival. She looked up at me and smiled. "You look lighter today," she said. I smiled back. Maybe because I finally stopped carrying what was never mine. She nodded, understanding without asking. In this place, no one pried into personal lives. They treated silence as a form of strength. And for the first time, so did I. At noon, my team and I had lunch by the harbor. The sunlight shimmered across the water, and the boats moored along the dock looked like pieces of a still life painting. I thought about my old life in America, the years spent explaining myself, asking for permission just to live the life I wanted. Then I looked around the table at these new colleagues, strangers only months ago, who never made me feel the need to prove my worth. A quiet gratitude rose in my chest. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop and reread Rachel's last email, not to reopen a wound, but to see it in a different light. I read through it once more, then smiled faintly. Her final words, "You'll regret it someday," echoed softly in my mind. But now I knew the truth. Regret never comes from choosing yourself. It only comes from waiting too long to do it. I closed my laptop and stepped onto the balcony. Lisbon's sunset unfolded slowly, the sun sinking behind the red rooftops as church bells rang in the distance. I stood there, between two worlds, one fading behind me, the other quietly beginning. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the scent of the sea and faint traces of wine from a nearby cafe. I whispered to myself, almost like a promise. Silence isn't weakness. It's the choice not to be dragged down with others. In the fading gold of dusk, I realized I no longer needed apologies. I no longer needed validation. Sometimes, simply standing still, calm and unmoved, is the loudest answer of all. 6 months passed since I left the US. Lisbon had become home truly, deeply. I stopped measuring time by how long it's been since they last called, and started measuring it by sunrises, projects, and the gentle rhythm of a life that finally felt like mine. Work at Lumitech flourished beyond my expectations. I was promoted to creative director for Southern Europe, spoke at international conferences, and once even gave a talk titled The Emotional Language of Light. I'm in May. Life had settled into something steady, luminous, so much so that I sometimes forgot there was still a family across the ocean who once called me a traitor. Then one afternoon in June, as I was finalizing the lighting sequence for the summer festival, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in 6 months. Mom. Linda Dawson. My hand froze. The phone glowed, dimmed, then lit up again. Finally, I took a deep breath and answered. Joy? Her voice was small, trembling, almost lost in the static of the international line. It didn't have that sharp, commanding edge I'd grown up with. It was tired, fragile, human. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't answer. She went on, her words broken, like someone walking against a strong wind. I was wrong. About everything. I don't even know where to start. Part of me tensed instinctively, but another part, the quieter one, felt an unexpected sense of relief. So I stayed silent, letting her speak. Rachel and Ethan. She began again, her voice cracking. They're drowning in debt. The restaurant couldn't pay its bills, their credit cards got frozen, and they had to sell the car to cover the bank loan. Your father and we took out part of our retirement savings to help them pay the mortgage. Your father's heart condition is worse. The doctor told him to avoid stress, but... She stopped, breathing hard. Everything's fallen apart, Joy. The family I tried so hard to hold together, I destroyed it with my own hands. I listened. I didn't interrupt. On the other end, she continued, her voice trembling like a confession. I used to believe that if the eldest daughter was strong, she had to carry the heavier load. Because that's what I was taught. Your grandparents. They forced me to give all my wages to Uncle Daniel for his college. When I protested, they said, that's a sister's duty. Oh. I promised myself I would never do that to my own child, but somehow, I did exactly the same. I closed my eyes, letting every word sink in, heavy, but honest. I didn't understand, she said softly. Not until you left. When you were no longer there to help, I realized how much I had depended on you, not because you had money, but because I was afraid to take responsibility. Her voice faltered, then fell to a whisper, fragile and raw. Can you forgive me, Joy? I took a deep breath and turned toward the window. Lisbon's sunset spilled gold across the city, streaks of orange, pink, and violet bleeding into the sky. It was so peaceful I couldn't bear to stain it with resentment. Mom, I said slowly, each word steady. I already have. Honestly, I forgave you a long time ago. I just wasn't calm enough to say it yet. All. On the other end, I heard her sob softly, a sound halfway between grief and release. And then, silence. I spoke softly. I'm not promising to come back, at least not now. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm afraid that if I do, we'll just start the same pain all over again. I need to live farther away, so both of us can stay safe. She was quiet for a long time. Then her voice came through, low and weary but lighter than before. Just hearing you say that makes me feel at peace. Don't worry, Joy. I won't ask you to come back. I just want you to know, I see you now, really see you, not through the lens of duty. The call ended in silence. I stared at the phone for a long while before setting it down on the table. A tear slipped down my cheek, not bitter, not angry. It felt clear, almost weightless, like wiping a thin layer of dust from a window that hadn't been touched in years. I knew the past wouldn't vanish. But, for the first time, it had finally stopped chasing me.